Good morning. Hey, good afternoon. How you guys doing? Good to see people in here already. Hey, John, Thilo, good to see you guys. Maybe I advertised too late. I don't know. We'll see if anybody comes in here. It's okay if they don't. I don't mind doing these. People watch these. We get comments on them and YouTube and all that good stuff. So I hope everybody's healthy and happy and well. We're still up here doing our thing. A little bit busier week this week, but got our septic system going and installed, and working on our water well. Got that going and up. So we're making progress. Hopefully, we have a house up here in October, November. So that is what we're doing on this side. I don't have a big agenda today, other than there's a couple. I was just going to look at these questions here real quick. There's a couple of emails that came in, like I always get, either asking about a particular problem, or let me get over there to that, or I just use them as bouncing springboards, if you will, to go into conversation. So let me do this. Let me open up a couple of these messages that came in. Let's see here. There we go. So I had, and I don't know, I didn't ask if I could share this or not, but I'm going to, and regardless, I don't think it's that big of a deal if I can open my messenger up here. Let me see if I can share this. We'll talk about this technical issue first. Maybe, if I can get to it. Maybe I can't get to it. Going around here like a madman. Take my time and click gentle, as they say. Here we go. Let's see. So this was just, what, Friday, I guess? There we go. I'm going to share this here. If I can pull it up. Can I download it? Maybe I can do a little better. And I know I didn't ask to share this, but I don't know he's even in here, so I'm not going to worry too much. There's nothing really terribly interesting about it other than the technical stuff. So let me go over here, open this up, downloads, technical. There's a few things on this plate. That's why I wanted to share it with you. And it's a pretty good example of some of the things I talk about often, but never seem to have a good grip on that way. God dang, I should have prepared this, huh? Sorry, guys. Hold on just a second. I think I get the image and then I can't find it when I download it. I'll just show it to you from the... I wanted to zoom in on it, though. That's why I wanted to grab it, but that's okay. If we can't get it that way, we'll get this other way. Okay, so I'll leave that tab open. And a conversation, I have to scroll through all this stuff to get to it. There it is. Let's see if I can share this screenshot here. Share screen, and we'll talk about this photograph. Chrome tab, Messenger, there we go. So that should show up now. There it is, yeah. So this is, you know, when I get these all through the week, different questions, different kind of technical issues, basically. So I thought this one was interesting for the simple fact that it's got so much going on here. First off, these white stripes are reflections, I think, of light. That's not on the image. I don't think, anyway. I don't think it is. It could be, but I doubt it. one of the things that I like about this from the technical standpoint of teaching people what goes wrong, and it's kind of hard to get such a good example of this, is developer burn, this right here. And why I can tell this is developer burn, and I'll explain what that is in a second, is because it's so concentrated and goes right down to where he burned right through the black here. And then you can kind of see the flow of developer, where it did and didn't go. You can tell, you know, all kinds of things. It's also way overexposed, right? This is another kind of classic example of overexposure and what these plates look like. Another reason I wanted to show this is last week I was talking about sensitizing the silver bath, or exciting the silver bath with iodides. This is somewhat a decent example of what a plate would look like if you didn't sensitize your silver or excite your silver bath before you ran your plates or filled your bath up with iodides. Not exactly, this is classic overexposure, but they have similar looks to them. But anyway, let's go back to this developer burn. And we call these islands, right? Where either the developer didn't get or stopped, sweeps, islands. This is partial sweep, partial island. But this developer burn right here, let's talk about that for just a second. So what happens when you pull a plate from your holder and you're ready, you've made your exposure, you're ready to pour your developer on. The last thing you want to do is what happened here, pours the developer right on like a stream, a tap of water right on the plate. You want to go a long way on the plate, or if you use a plate a helper tray, which I don't really recommend because you can run into some other problems with those things. But you want to try to flush that iron or that developer over the plate evenly and all at once, as much as you can anyway. When you pour that concentration of fresh developer on that silver like that, that literally plows through it and burns it. It is a type of burn, if you will, and it's hard. It's a forceful. It's physical, obviously chemical, but it's mostly just concentrating that stream of developer onto the plate. And this was a great example of that. That's a classic developer burn, and you can see by the way the plate's outlined too. So it's kind of fun sometimes to get these plates that you have questions about that you don't really understand or have never seen something like that. And a lot of people don't understand that because they're taught the technique of developing, I've said this many times on here, is the most difficult for people to get down. It's not pouring the collodion on the plate, it's the developer technique, because so many things can go wrong. That developer burn and those sweeps are just a couple of them. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong. Overdevelopment, underdevelopment, having your chemistry off. So it's a little bit of a dilemma. So hello, Linda. Hello. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name there, but I believe it's Poland, though. I'm not sure. But anyway, welcome. That's great to see you guys in here. So we can have many things go wrong, but the developer and some problems related to that, the developer burn on this, like I said, is a really good classic example of that. Let me see if I can, I'm going to stop this just for a second here. Let me see if I can pull up another one here. So yeah, there's people always talk about oysters and sweeps and stuff on developer. And it's true, those are really common. But a lot of times when you have this, these dark and light spots, and you have, it's difficult to put into words what it visually looks like. But a lot of times it's just the way you're pouring that developer on the plate itself, and the technique is terribly important. So you got to remember to manage that technique and learn the right way to do it is really the biggest thing. And one of the reasons I don't like helper trays, and I just mentioned that earlier, unless you're doing great big plates, and this is still a problem, but one of the reasons I don't like helper trays is because you have buildup in the tray itself. You know, every plate you put in, unless you clean that out really well each time, which most people don't, or you waste a bunch of distilled water, and then you still have residue in the holder. And also, I think it's kind of harsh to pour a bunch of developer out into a tray and then flush it over. I think the process that reduction of the halides to pure metallic silver it's a more gentle process. It's kind of like the physical pour the burn there you just saw, that kind of thing. There's physics involved, chemistry involved, and the technique is really important. So here's another one that I got this week. This is from Marcus. Let me show you this one. He has a couple of things going on here. We'll talk about both of them. He was more interested in what this little oyster problem was. Let me share this again here, Chrome tab. So he was more interested in this little oyster stain here, but you can see here as well too, there's a whole another developer issue going on here. These little stains, you can see this pocket up here, you can see this pocket here, you can see a pocket there. That's all organic material, usually coming from the side of the plate. And when you pour that developer on there, that organic material will flow around. That's what creates oysters. These stains are typical model marks. They call them all kinds of things, but this is all developer related. All of this is developer related. And so, you know, it's kind of funny. And he said this as well too. I could show you the thread, but he said, look, it's not there before I develop. And yeah, it's true, because when you develop, you you flush all that stuff over the plate, whether it's organic material or only your chemistry. And so whatever's there is going to interact and react with the silver on the plate. So another, you know, developer is always, like, it seems to be always pronounced, the problems that way. So there's a couple of things there that you can definitely, and if you're listening to this and not watching the video, what you'll want to do is jump in and look at those two examples, because the burn, the sweep that appears, or the oyster, that's really technically an oyster that Marcus had on his plate there. But those are all related to developer, and one is having organic material on your plate. That last one that I showed you, you pour your developer out, it pulls it out, spreads it around, or it starts and stops, sweeps or oysters. And the other one is physically just dumping that developer on one spot of the plate and burning that. That's called the developer burn. So those are a couple of things this week. I didn't have, Boguslav. Oh, okay. Is that Boguslav? I'm not sure. I was just reading the chat over here. Hello, Jan. Good to see you. Good to see everybody here. So those are just a couple of not ideas, a couple of problems that I had sent to me this week. Like I said, I get, you know, between, you know, half a dozen and a dozen emails every week that kind of lay out. A lot of them are just similar, and they're over and over. A lot of varnish, a lot of developer, a lot of silver bath. Not asking how the process works, but saying what's wrong here and showing me an image. And that's okay. But as you go through this process and you learn how it works, you'll know immediately. I can pretty much, not always, but pretty much look at a plate and tell you whether it's chemistry or technique. And those are the two areas, right? Either your chemistry is not working right, or your technique is off. And your technique can be everything from your technique of developing, your technique of exposure, your technique of how you handle the plate, your technique of how you varnish, what tools and materials you use. Those are all technique related. There's also the chemical side of it. So I can usually look at a plate and say that's a technique problem, or that's a chemical problem, or that's a combination of both. And sometimes it really is a combination of both of those things. Um, what's frustrating for people is they spend so much time on their chemistry, or they spend a lot of money on their chemistry and buy really, really good quality kits, and their technique is so poor that the good chemistry doesn't matter. And when you have good technique and bad chemistry, that doesn't matter either. So those two things have to align. You have to, that's why I really pound this chemistry a lot and how this process works, is because once you understand the chemistry, and you don't have to be an organic chemist, or you don't have to be a complete geek. Just have the basic understanding, know when things go wrong, what they look like, and how to resolve them. There are a lot of problems in this process that look similar visually. So when you look at I just gave you a great example. When you look at overexposure and your bath not being excited, when you look at a bath problem, an iodide problem, whether even if it's excited and you have an iodide problem in your bath, or a pH problem, or a developer problem, those things they're really difficult to tell apart. So what you have to do is if you're being asked, if you're somebody that can answer or help people, and they're asking you what's wrong with this plate, and you quickly go through your little index in your mind visually and say, God, that could be overexposure, iodide problems, pH problems. So you have to start with the most common and step back and have people explain. I always I never say this, but I always want to say, look, some people ask very specific questions, and it's like, hey, I wasn't there when you made your chemistry. I don't know who you bought it from. I wasn't there when you made the plates or how you made it. I don't know where you learned the process from and what techniques you're using. It's really difficult when a technical question comes in and it's high level and vague and kind of mysterious. And I've had those before too. So, what substrate are you using? Where are you buying your chemistry? What's your technique? Who'd you learn this from? All those things make a big difference in trying to troubleshoot this stuff. You have to have some kind of baseline to work from. And so that's why over the years, although I've changed a little bit, the overall, my techniques, the overall chemistry, everything that I recommend has basically been the same. Hopefully I've improved a little bit on some of them and found ways to mitigate some of the issues that I've had and other people have had. My goal has always been to keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. You've already got a big mix of problems that you could run into. Most of the time, I find it's pilot error. It's the people, right? It's technique driven. Most of the time, it's bad technique. And one of the things that I have talked a lot about on these shows and these broadcasts is learning the process from someone that actually knows the process. And I've talked about before, when people talk, oh, I'd like to do a workshop, air quotes, workshop. And what they end up doing is they end up going to some demonstration where there's 6 or 8 or 10 people, and they stand around and they watch somebody pour an aluminum plate and put it in a bath and expose it in a 4x5 camera with strobes or something like that, and then process it. And then everybody in the group gets to do that, right? That's a demonstration, maybe a hands-on demonstration. That's not a workshop. How I define workshop is you come in, you sit down, and you go over the chemistry, safety, handling, mixing, storing, all that stuff. Get a basic idea and overview of what those compounds or those chemicals do in the process. Then you start learning technique, what's happening each step of the way. And then you sit down and you start pouring plates, and you pour. Most people in my workshops, anywhere from 10 to 20 plates, right? In a workshop, just them. And on top of that, sorry, ignore my phone if you can hear it. There's a rooster out here crowing too. And so people in my workshops actually get, that kind of not only chemical and handling and all that, but they get a start. And that's what I try to do. This is just, You only have 2 or 3 days or even a week. It's just to start getting into the process and try to walk them through what each chemical and each compound does. And a lot of times I'll even show mistakes. Usually they'll make mistakes, and I can watch it coming, and then we can go back around and say, this is what you did. This is why this plate looks like this. And each plate we critique, maybe not some of it right there and then, but definitely at the end of the workshop, we sit down, we put all the plates out, and we look at them, and we talk about everything from exposure to even lighting composition, varnish, developer, problems in the silver bath or the technique with the silver bath. I don't necessarily ever have problems with the chemistry going to workshops. If I had workshops where we've had a problem with chemistry, yep, and we sit down, really good stuff happens kind of organically, and we get to sit down and resolve that problem. But that's just the beginning. So if you start people on the right path with the right techniques and the right direction to learn the process, to actually learn what these chemicals do, to actually learn the good techniques. And when I say techniques, I don't only mean good techniques for solid plates, well-made plates, but also safety, right? There's a big element of technique we talk about. I cover a lot in safety in my workshop. So how do you mitigate? How do you, ventilation? Where do you do this? What step do you do that at? How big should this be? How far back when should you wear gloves? When can you not wear gloves? All those things we talk about in the technique area. So technique is not just only, how I flow the plate or how I hold it or what techniques I use to rock it or any of those kinds of things. Technique also involves handling for safety. Even simple things like people do this all the time. This just kind of entered my mind here as I was talking. When you pour a plate collodion, you drain it into your drain bottle, you rock it a little, you wick it off on a little paper towel. Just little things like this to recap the bottles, the collodion and the pour bottle, just to recap those before you go in and drop the silver bath. People leave those open, the ether evaporates out, and pretty soon at the end of the day, your collodion's like gum. It's so thick, it's like, God, I can't get it around the plate, So just little time, and it's unsafe. You don't want to be breathing ether, right? Those things off gas like crazy. So it's both technique, money saving, safety, just all over. And that's just one little tiny weird idiosyncratic kind of thing. But at the end of the day, you add all those up through the day, right? Dripping the silver off the plate and back into the tank for a couple of minutes, wiping the backs off, cleaning your plate holders out, min-waxing or polyurethane your holders. All these little things that are taught in a workshop will provide you safety, better images, less money on chemistry and compounds, all that stuff. So workshops are, and I say that with air quotes again, workshops are all relative. So when people say, I want to attend a workshop, and they're driven or directed toward what I call a demonstration, where there's 6 or 8 or 10 people, and they're all doing that same, watching one person make a plate, and then they try it. They get to make one plate. They haven't learned anything, really. They've had fun, I bet. And maybe they've had, and usually it's just poor technique. It's just a way to, maybe it's a way to get people excited. Maybe if you wanted to go to a demonstration and you like it and you're interested in, then do a workshop, that'd be fine too. But people who go to these demonstrations, and these are the people that I hear a lot from, and I'll ping back questions. They'll say, oh, I know, I don't know anything about that, because they tell me they've attended a workshop. So I gauge that by what they say. And then I find out, no, it was really just kind of a glorified demonstration, right? That they got to participate in a little bit. So that's just food for thought. There are good people teaching it out there, good instructors, and there are a lot that don't know what's going on. So buyer be warned, the old Latin phrase. So just be aware that you want certain things out of a workshop, and in my book, I lay out kind of my idea on what a workshop and what that workshop teacher or instructor should be qualified to do. And then within the workshop, sizes, what you cover, what you don't cover, those kinds of things. So just again, this is coming off the back of every week getting emails from people that haven't been properly trained in wet collodion. Years ago, I guess I probably shouldn't say his name, but I had a gentleman contact me and say, "Hey, Quinn, we should get together." This was years ago, several years ago. He said, "We should get together and form a group that we know who's, quote, qualified or can teach these processes safely and effectively and all that, and then recommend that out there." And I kind of pushed back a little bit and I said, "That's probably a good idea if you could get people to buy off on that, but it's kind of like a monopoly, right? Nobody has any say on what people do with this stuff. You can't, you can form a group like that, and if you get people to acknowledge or attend those kinds of things, that's great. But at the end of the day, you can't stop people. There are people that come in this process expressly to teach workshops or to make money that way off of that kind of stuff, right? Their intention is never to make work really or do any of that. Their intention is to make money off workshops or build equipment for the process. It's that old adage, like where the state I live in here in Colorado, I live right by a gold mine over here in Victor, Colorado. It's probably half an hour away. And it's still active. They still mine gold over there. But back in the day, in the 19th century, more people made money off of selling picks and shovels than they did with the people getting the gold. So there's a lot of same kind of things going on. I'm sure in everything we do, but in wet collodion, you'll see a lot of people come in just to teach or just to do workshops and make money off of that, which is fine. I mean, if they're good, they're qualified, and they're doing it right, that's fine. And then there are people that come in just to do commercial work. They just want to do pop-ups and make portraits or do reenactment gigs and make money off of that kind of the commercial side. And then there are the people that come in just to make the equipment, the picks and the shovels kind of thing. And there's a lot of that going on because, which leads me into my next kind of thing, because people don't really know why they're using the wet plate collodion process. They haven't discovered that. And we've talked about this several times in the past, but the idea of saying, why am I using this? What's the purpose of it? Is a much more difficult question than saying, hey, maybe I can get some woodworking equipment and build cameras or do lenses or sell workshops or do pop-up studio portraits. Those are easily defined, real super easy goals to go toward. It's much more difficult to say, I'm interested in wet collodion for these reasons, for my work, for making my photographs. Oh, sorry, I need to look at the chat over here. I was alone in my workshop, made 19 plates. It sounds like you attended one of mine, Linda. Sorry, I can put this up. He taught me from beginning how to chemicals, technique, exposure. Now he's my mentor. Awesome. That is great. That's the way it should be. Honestly, I think my personal opinion. Of course, I don't have the market on anything either, so that's not a big deal. These are all my opinion. I should start these shows by saying everything you're about to hear is strictly my opinion, right? Because this isn't gospel. This is just one guy jabbering on a YouTube channel. Eric, yes, sir. I attended a demo with Luther Gerlach right before I started. I had no idea how he was doing it, but I was enthralled with the final piece. That was good enough to push me to it. Exactly. And I think that's what demonstrations are for. Like if you're a historian or you're a, whatever it is, those are, demonstrations are wonderful to see how the process, and I've done a lot of those demonstrations for historians and conservators and people working technically in historic processes They don't want to do wet collodion. They just want to see it. They want to watch it happen. They want their photograph, whatever it is. I've done a lot of those. And then there are people that just like, wow, I want to do that. This process looks amazing. The next question, Eric, is why you wanted to do it and why you're using it. It's easy to be drawn into it, obviously. I mean, thousands and thousands of people are. So, but that's great. That's exactly what I was talking about. And demos are great for that. Hello, Drew. Good to see you. No worries. Getting on now is better than watching it later. Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe you can watch it later too. But so segueing into that off the back of the technical, off the back of why people get into the process, I was doing, probably it's been over a year now. This time's going so fast. Maybe a couple of years ago, I started just making little notes about what I saw online, what I saw on social media within the wet plate world, right? What I saw going on. I don't spend I probably could spend more time on that, looking at that and studying this kind of stuff, what people are doing. But a couple of years ago, it was a little more mellow for me and I didn't have as much going on. But at that time, what I saw people doing was basically what I just said. They come in for one of those three reasons, right? Pop-up commercial stuff, teach workshops, or make equipment, or sell what I call picks and shovels to the wet plate world. And we all need that, which is fine. It creates, if you're into that little bit of capitalism, which I think is probably pretty healthy, it creates kind of a little competition thing. Maybe people like their silver bath tanks like this and their dippers like this and this manufacturer, it's good. And it creates prices, nobody has a monopoly kind of thing, which is all good. I think that's a good thing. So, and I'm not putting any of this down. I'm just saying these are the things that I saw going on primarily in wet collodion. And then you had the other end of the spectrum where people would be making photographs, and people would be making photographs, putting them on social media. And then what I used to do is I used to screen capture all the comments below people would like, and I'd capture all the comments, and all the comments, like 90, I won't go extreme, 95%. And I could say that with great confidence. 95% of the images, the responses were, what kind of collodion did you use? What lighting is that? Did you use this? Nothing about the photograph, right? What kind of camera? What kind, it's all that other stuff that we're comfortable talking about. The why questions are very difficult. They're very difficult. I get that. I understand that. That's why there's not a lot out there. But I always use the example, like if you know that the writer Ernest Hemingway, he's dead now, but he wrote that Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Old Man and the Sea, in 1953. Kind of started the novels, it was kind of a innovator in writing in a way, in a certain type of writing. But Ernest Hemingway, nobody ever asked Ernest Hemingway what kind of typewriter he used to type Old Man and the Sea, right? Nobody ever asked that question. They asked the questions that mattered, like the questions about the content of the book, right? That's similar to what I'm talking about here. When you post a photograph and all people want to know is that a 2-salt collodion? What kind of strobes did you use on it? And what is that, a Petzval lens? There's nothing wrong with those questions. I'm not saying that they shouldn't or can't be asked at all. I'm just saying what's left out of the conversation is probably the most important part of the conversation. Is why did you make this image? What is it about? What is it that you're doing? That kind of thing. So that segues over to why wet collodion. And thank you for asking this, Linda. I'd be more than happy to answer. And this looks like a setup. I didn't talk to Linda before this or anything. This is her question. So why do I use wet collodion? And that is probably the most important question to ask somebody, especially before looking at their work, because it gives you, again, the context, the framework of the narrative or the story they're trying to tell, or the the conversation they're trying to start, however you want to put it. The reason or reasons I use wet collodion photography in my work and have for a long, yeah, no, we didn't, Linda. For a long time, I've used wet collodion in my work. The reason I initially selected this process, and specifically, and I want to make this clear, is the direct positives, the ambrotypes or tintypes. And I'll tell you why I selected negatives for this last project, but negative tintypes and ambrotypes, the direct positive process here or variant here. What I wanted to do, I'm primarily a portrait photographer. I'd been working on a project called Portraits from Madison Avenue for a few years before I even got into wet plate. And at the turn of the century, I was kind of struggling, and it was a technical struggle for me. I was, at that time, I'd gone through all kinds of large format film. I didn't use digital. I didn't shoot any digital on that project. I did film 35 millimeter, medium format and large format. And at the time that I went into wet collodion, I was shooting a Contax 645, 6x45. So you know what Contax 645 is. Carl Zeiss glass, you know, probably, I don't know, $6,000 camera system anyway. And I was making portraits of marginalized communities. That's what I was doing. So my theme, my idea stems from an experience I had when I was a young boy in these low-income apartment complex my father owned, and marginalized communities, people who are othered, people who are pushed into the margins. I had a great interest in exploring this question of why marginalized people are treated the way they are. And so as I was stumbling through this technical, there are beautiful portraits, you know, I was making silver gelatin prints and you know, 645 and beautiful glass, technically strong, you know, really, really beautiful portraits, but they were lacking something, and I didn't know what that something was. And I sat down one evening. I was really, really discouraged about even wanting to try to finish that project or that work. And I sat down one evening or afternoon, whenever it was, and I looked over on my bookshelf and I saw Zarkowski's book, The 100 Greatest Photographs from the MoMA, Museum of Metropolitan, MoMA. What is it? The Museum, it's the MoMA. I don't know the acronym. I know the acronym. I don't know the words. So the art gallery in New York, you know what I mean? So it was his book on the 100 greatest photographs of that gallery or that museum. And in the front of it was the daguerreotype, and then immediately jumped to this little 6 plate, this ambrotype. And there was this a guy sitting in the back of a stagecoach with his long top hat on, staring at the camera. And it showed all the artifacts and everything around the plate. And there's something just absolutely grabbed me about that image. And I knew what wet plate collodion was. I mean, I'd studied it in undergraduate school. And so I immediately gravitated and said, look, I started looking into this and said, can this be done? Blah, blah, blah. Yes, it can. Here, you know, all that. And I started understanding that the process, you know, it's a throwback. And so it's this Museum of Modern Art. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. I apologize for that. I should have known that. So I immediately understood that this process was from the mid-19th century. It was difficult, a little bit dangerous, and it was abandoned, right? It was abandoned by 1890, 1900, for the most part. It's always been around, but when I say abandoned, I mean it was taken out of the mainstream. It was always on the fringes. But here I was working with marginalized communities, a little difficult, a little dangerous, and they'd been abandoned. So I started making these connections with the process, with the variant, you know, fragile glass, you know, kind of fragile people, the process showing our own human imperfections and them, you know, kind of displaying our human fragility and imperfections. And all these things started coming together. And the process itself, the reason, and I didn't know it at the time, but it showed itself to me, like so many things in this process. the reason that I use this process was, and is, you can engage as a portrait photographer. I always say we co-create the image. It's not just a big power thing where I'm in charge and, the sitter co-creates. They're involved with that. And that was probably the real clinch pin for me, the real solidifying of this is a process that can show you, reveal, and walk you down the path to tell this story about marginalized people, or people who are abandoned, and people who are pushed off the sides, and that are visibly or otherwise you can see their imperfections, and they're pushed out of the communities, right? And so for me, it was both the materials, the ritual of the process, obviously the end result, right? So when you get in and you start learning about this process, and direct positives are laterally reversed, right? So we get to see the person in the photograph that you made a photograph of as they see themselves in the mirror. Really intimate things that really make a big difference when you're trying to tell a story. I have 4 words that hold up my work like table legs: identity, difference, memory, and justice. And those words really, every photograph that I make, I do my best to think about these conceptual things and these overall ideas of why I'm using wet plate, and really support those photographs with those 4 words. And one of the first big ones is memory. And immediately in wet collodion, you're taken back. It has that look and feel. It's an old photograph, right? So the colors, the feel of the vintage lenses, all those things, I'm trying to bring the viewer in, tell them a story, and give them context for what I'm doing, and then tell them why I'm using the certain tools and materials that I'm using, and have those tools and material inform that work. And wet collodion is the best process. The tools, the rituals, the chemicals, everything support this idea of what I'm doing, and I can fit them in really well. I don't need to use any of that art speak stuff. I don't need to BS anyone. You can see it, right? If you like my work or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I can justify why I selected this process, why I've selected this subject matter, or these people, or portraits, or still lifes, whatever I'm doing, landscapes. And it's really easy for me to do that. And each year, or every year that I worked in it, or every few years I worked in it, it has something to reveal for me. So when I'm in Germany, living in Germany, working on a project on the shore of the Holocaust, I'm photographing these old synagogues, where these synagogues once stood before November of 38 in Kristallnacht, when they broke the night of broken glass. I'm in Mainz, Germany, and I'm making a photograph of an old synagogue. And here I am standing there out in the middle of the road kind of thing. And I realize that here I am with a piece of glass, and the night of broken glass, right? They broke all the glass out of the synagogues, burned the Torah, and all this stuff. And I'm fixing these glass images in the very compound that was used in the gas chambers in Europe, right? Zyklon B, potassium cyanide. So it starts revealing these materials and the connection to these marginalized communities, and these ideas and concepts that I'm working with. All of a sudden, every couple of years, these materials or the process is showing me something connected to my work. And I've never had that really in film, and I don't really even work in digital. So that is the very, very skim of the top of why I use wet collodion. John J. Decker says, many non-photographers can't tell or see a difference. Yep. Between my carbon prints and my black and white inkjets, have chosen inkjets over carbon prints. Do you find this with wet plate? That's a great question, Jay, or a comment too, which is actually fact. And I do believe that. I think there's kind of like wine tasting, and maybe this isn't a good example. I'm not a wine taster, but I think you have to have a certain refinement visually, maybe even intellectually, academically, to look at certain historic printing processes and understand their value over an inkjet print. So you've got to remember, Jay, our culture is trained up to love the very superficial, the very easy, the very flushable, what's next kind of thing. So what they're exposed to, no pun intended, the most is probably what they're going to like the most until they're educated, right? Usually, until you help them understand why this carbon print is much more valuable or important than this inkjet, and just start with archivability, right? I mean, just that alone. But do I find that with wet plate? I do not. And this is why. Wet plate collodion is unique. And I've got to say positives. This is direct positives, not negatives and prints. I will leave prints out of this for now. But direct positives, I can hand a plate, a metal or a glass plate to a person, and they can hold that object in their hands, that artifact. They can hold that, right? So, oh my God, this, what? You know, and they're just like, the material becomes important. They can hold that. Like our life, like we're on, not Zoom, I was going to say Zoom. We're on StreamYard and YouTube right now. This is all virtual. It's great. It's wonderful. We're doing this. This is wonderful. But it's virtual. If we were sitting in a room together, sharing a coffee and doing the same thing, it would be a whole new level of experience, right? We'd really get to know one another. We get to, you know, it's a different experience. So when I hand the glass or metal plate to a person and they're holding that in their hand and not swiping it on a phone or looking at it on a piece of, you know, digital inkjet paper, that's a whole different experience. So I have to say no on that side, but yes on the print side. Yes, prints are ubiquitous. So unless you educate and inform and say, I know the inkjet looks good. There's no problem with it. It's wonderful. That's great. But look at this carbon or this oil or this albumin or this salt or this gum bichromate or whatever it is, right? And let me tell you why this is so special. And, you know, people, if people are open to learn, most people are not dumb. They'll, oh my God, real? Well, I didn't know that. And all of a sudden, that inkjet print that might last 20 years now kind of takes a back seat to this more tactile, more, you know, historically correct, if you will. And I'm not into any of that stuff necessarily, but those are kind of the differences. When you can hand a person a photograph to hold that's of a different substrate, metal or glass, it's going to be a whole different experience than giving them a piece of paper. Yes, physicality makes a big difference. It does. It really does. And it's not only, it is the physicality of it. It is holding that object that we don't get to do anymore, you know, and now this virus has even made even get-togethers kind of, you know, obsolete. You know, I don't know what that's going to do to us. I know how it's changed photography. I know, you know, digital photography and swiping on your phone, we've taken the respect way down. I mean, cheap, fast, quick, another blade of grass, go, 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 go. And here I am struggling for 8 or 10 hours to get 1 or 2 plates that I'm pleased with, you know? So it makes a big difference to understand the context, to understand the history, and then to understand the materials. And when we do it cheap, fast, and plentiful, I think that's an Errol Morris movie, but when we do it in some order like that, you're going to take that respect down a little bit. People are not going to go for, you know, the carbon print over the inkjet necessarily. But that's a great question. I love to hear that or to contemplate that. Oh, there you go, Linda. I'm so glad you're chiming in. Linda asks, you think we need wet plates to be perfect, almost Photoshopped? If the image is good but have some rough edges or weird patterns on them, I think this is what makes them really unique. That's a great conversation, Linda, because we have this constantly in the wet plate world. We have this dialogue constant. I don't know if there's a week goes by that I don't have to respond or contemplate these questions again. And they're good questions. Don't get me wrong. They're great questions. It's a great question. But basically, are we striving to make film-like images with wet collodion? I don't think any of us are. I think there's a a large portion of us that want to be technically strong, technically in control, so we can get what we want, whether it's light or composition, look and feel, however you want to put it. And then there's a little part there that's left for serendipity, right? Like I often quote Sally Mann here. Sally Mann says, every time I pour a plate, I pray for the angels of serendipity to show up, the angels of chance, to show me what might be on this plate. To rely on that, the artifacts and the poor technical prowess or the inability to technically make a strong, correct, and you'd have to define that anyway, image, to depend on that, I'd probably push back a little bit. But to be open for it a little bit, because it's wet collodion, there's always going to be that factor, I think is okay. I don't think you should hang your hat on the imperfection, but at the same time, I don't think you should try to make film. If you want to make film, buy sheets of film and process them and run them, right? So there's, I don't mean to kind of middle road that or sidestep it, but I'm kind of in the middle of that. I'm kind of like, I'm open. I've published images that are that have unique artifacts that I didn't plan on having, right? I mean, let me do this. Let me show you. One comes to my mind because I just, it happened and I embraced it and I didn't plan on it happening. Let me share my screen again here for just a broken image. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
The yeah, there you go. That's a good one. That's a really good one. That's actually, yeah, that's a post processing problem, right? That's not in the process itself, but yeah, that broken plate, you're absolutely correct about that. I wanted to show you this one. Here we go. There you go. There's one. Normally, I would never allow all this developer problem up here in an image like that. I'd never say that's cool or that's okay, ever. But, you know, given what the context of it is, blah, 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 you know, this is a perfect example of what Linda's talking about. There are people that go in and make wet collodion and Photoshop the crap out of them. You wouldn't be able to. I've seen inkjet prints of Photoshop wet plate, and I've seen the original wet plate, and you wouldn't even recognize it. I mean, you just wouldn't. So it just depends on your style, right? What are you after? What are you doing? Again, we always go back to this idea: why am I using wet plate? You know, that's the first question. And all these other questions, do I want artifacts? Do I not want artifacts? Those kind of things are all answered once you answer that first question, why am I doing this? Thilo says, do you think the photographers of the 19th century were going for perfect images? Yes, I do, Thilo. Absolutely, 100%. I think people in the photographers in the 19th century would consider themselves like the most elite commercial photographers today. They're producing a product for a customer. They want the very best. They want, you know, all the technical stuff. They would never accept an image like what I have up on the screen here. That would be like, that is a throwaway plate for days, right? So for me, it's just, this plate was put in my body of work. It's a cottonwood tree, and there's a big history of the Cheyenne in Arapaho using cottonwood for different things, and it's on the Eastern Plains out here in Colorado. But this would have been on the scrap pile in 2 seconds had it been a commercial photograph. But because I had a story, I had context, I had all this stuff, this worked. So I had that knowledge beforehand. So when I saw this plate, although I didn't do this on purpose, to Linda's point, you know, I didn't go in Photoshop and clean it up and none of these negatives. I did none of that with. I didn't touch these plates one bit digitally at all, other than to photograph them on my light table. So I had digital copies of them. They were all printed pop. They were all printed on collodion chloride, untouched, border to border. Well, I take that back. Some of them I did lithograph on I think I did a couple of them I lithoed, but that was it with some red tape. how true. I find I use my homemade holders instead of purpose constructed holders if I wanted to work looser because it gets more artifacts. There you go. And if that's what you're after, that's a great thing to do. John mentioned I had a plate. In fact, it was this one pre-broken. I had a plate that I used of a portrait of Trey, young black guy in Germany that I was taken to Paris to show my friend over in at the Bièvre Photo Festival. And this is, let's see, I'll find the plate here. Sorry, scrolling through my Instagram feed here, but he's here somewhere. Oh, maybe he's not. Sorry. I thought I had him up here. There he is with a knife. That's not the plate, though. There's a lot of stuff up here. There he is. There it is. Perfect. So here's the original plate. I took it to Paris to show friends because I was just enamored with it. I just absolutely loved it. And then I dropped it in the parking lot at the hotel and broke it. And that's what it ended up being. And then I put it back together and I put it in the show, and it ended up being a guy that wrote the first book on Joel Peter Witkin bought it, and I made his portrait. So weird kind of, this is a little different than kind of the artifacts and the pour techniques and developer sweeps and stuff that you might get on your plates from the process. This is actual physical damage, but I did put all that back together. I did varnish it up. I did frame it, made it all archival. And it was one of my favorite images that I'd ever made. And again, I made this in a winter garden in Germany with this north light. And I covered him in baby oil too, and shot him with a f2.8 Derogi lens. So yeah, so those are kind of the things that I find. Well, I don't know if I find them. They're interesting. Let's put it that way. To contemplate why you're doing what you're doing, why you're using a certain process or not, and at the end of the day, you have to answer those questions yourself, because I cannot do that. People have to. Here's another good one here. Here's not necessary. This is not a mistake, but I wanted to point out another thing you run into in this process. Not that it has to do anything with my project, but this is I did a whole bunch of commissioned portraits in Paris. This is a Parisian model, and she came in. She sat down. She had these, really nice. I know the clothes were super expensive. She had her hair pulled back, and you look at her eyes, and you see that they're like snake eyes. They're just absolutely black. There's no pupil in them. There's no iris, nothing. So afterwards, she was frightened by it when it came up in the fix. She was absolutely, what is going on? And I said, oh my God. I said, are you wearing contact lenses? She said, yeah, they're UV protected contact lenses. So they're like putting on a sunglasses that are UV protected and going dark. So she didn't want that plate. So I kept it and made another one of her. I wish I could show it to you. It's somewhere up there. But and she had green eyes, so her eyes were quite light. I mean, not super light like blue, but so it was a completely different image. I ended up giving this one to my friend in Chicago, a photo teacher in Chicago. He loved it. He said it was a conversation starter. Had it over there in their living room, and people would walk up to it and say, "What is going on with her eyes?" And a great little conversation starter. So Jay says, "Is the photo taken to make a different statement after it was broken?" That's another good point. I'll go back to that. So Jay is asking about this photograph right here. Let's go back to that again. So if you're coming in or you missed this, I want to make this point, because that kind of piggybacks on kind of being in the mode, being prepared and open to talk about these things. And God dang, did I pass that up already? God, Quinn, pay attention. kind of being in the mode to talk about these things and being prepared to answer questions about what you're doing and why you're doing. So if we look at this image here, here's the original, unbroken, before I took it to Paris and broke it. Yeah, there it is right there. That's the whole story there. And here. So Jay is asking this question. He is saying or asking, is the photo taken to make a different statement after it was broken? Or does it make a different statement after it's broken? Yes, it does. Absolutely. No question about it. But guess what? If you look at the context of this person that I photographed, you'll see how this serendipitous, well, you can't say serendipitous accident. I guess you can. Happy accident really played into this. So this, again, I'm working on marginalized communities. This is a young gay black man in Germany, 80 years after the Holocaust, right? He would have been taken away to Auschwitz and put in an oven just like all the other undesirables. And so when I broke this piece and then put it back together, it was so much more powerful to me. That image spoke so much more about Trey. I call it broken homosexual. And it was just so representative. It was a physical demonstration of what he was living through there at the time, even now, right? So his sexual preference, his race, all of those things, his color, all of those things played a role. And then to have that plate break, I guess maybe the angels of serendipity were there and wanted that to happen. So to answer your question, yes, big difference. And it was perfect for what that image, the context and the intention and the story of that image was trying to tell. And I photographed him a lot. And out of all the plates to have drop and break in a parking lot in a hotel in Paris, this one, kind of weird, but yet, interestingly enough, much more powerful after it was broken. I never intended to break it, right? I mean, back to Linda's question, we want these as perfect as we can, right? I mean, maybe. The image was great as it was. I didn't need to do anything to it. So to break it would have been the last thing on my mind. So Drew says, I was reading a book on Timothy O'Sullivan. Awesome. It's reasonable to assume these plates were as free as what artifacts as reproduction show. Wow, another really super great question, Drew. And I love this conversation because it's wonderful to dispel some of the myths and ideas out there. So when you look at Timothy O'Sullivan, if you look at Alexander Gardner, if you look at any of these old boys out there working in this time period that Drew's talking about, the mid 1860s to 1890s, right? 1880s. All these guys traveling through the West with these big wagon carts full of Watkins and O'Sullivan and Gardner and I take credit for all the photographs. So dang, the most popular one, I forgot his name. He was damn near blind at the end. He had the studio, photographed all the presidents. My God, I can't remember his name. Somebody here will tell me. But if you look at all these guys, especially during the Civil War, they made so many photographs. For me to work in wet collodion a lot, there have been times that I work like nonstop in collodion, like every day, pouring plates, working in it just constantly. And I guarantee you, after you do that for a month, it'll be amazing. You'll be amazed at what you can do if you look at pre-working full-time and post-working full-time. My point is, there are two things going on here, Drew. Number one, those old guys were absolutely masters at the process. Obviously, I mean, they had to be. So not taking anything away from them at all there. They were absolute masters and they made beautifully clean plates. But if you go to the loc.gov, LOC, libraryofcongress.gov, libraryofcongress.gov, and you do a search on wet collodion negatives, they'll show the full negative. And two things you're going to recognize there. Number one, you're going to see that they used a lens that was probably twice as large as they needed, which we don't do today. And they had all this dead space around the subject matter. So they could print it and mat it. So any of the artifacts, any of the pour marks, any of the bad things happening on the plate would never show in a print. So Matthew Brady, thank you, Drew. Matt Brady, there you go. Matthew Brady, I knew somebody would come up with it. So they were really good at what they did. And number two, they used their technical prowess to clean the plate up, to do the like I know the edges are all going to be jacked up. So I'm going to, rather than using a 400 millimeter lens, I'm going to use an 800 millimeter lens, or vice versa, however you wanted to do it, right? Depending on what the scene was. The bottom line was they'd leave their subject matter in the center and leave big wide space for printing to put a mat over that. So they were good, but you're not going to get away from, some artifacts on these plates, at least a tiny bit. Even the best plates you can do will still have a tiny mark or a tiny something on it. I mean, I may have made one in my life that didn't have that, but it's just kind of part of the process. So that's a great question, though. I love that question because people want to know that all the time. And Matthew Brady really didn't make he wasn't even a photographer, really, to be honest with you. He's a good businessman, and he got credit for a lot of the photographs during and after the Civil War, but the American Civil War. But he was not really a photographer. So, but O'Sullivan, Gardner, Watkins, got so many of them. I even like to. I have. I should show you this. It's in the wrapper, but let me grab it here. I have. I may have shown this before. I don't know how well I can see it here. Oh, you probably can. It's in plastic too. This is Mosa. This is Edward Curtis print photogravure. This is a beautiful. I can't wait to get this up in my eyes. I'm leaving them packaged because I don't want them all damaged and stuff. But Edward Curtis, wonderful. I mean, he used dry plates, of course, but he did a lot of pop printing and ended up doing copper plates and photogravures, obviously. I also have an original. Here's an original one that was given to me by his great-grandson. Piece of a whole plate. Let me see if I can blow this up. Yeah, there we go, a little bit. That's an original Edward Curtis. I understood that he made these as Christmas cards and sent them out. I think he made that print himself. So I'm proud to have them anyway. I'm happy to have them. But the bottom line is these guys were good. This is what they did full time. I don't know anyone that works in collodion full time. Out of all the people in the world, I don't know anyone that says this is my thing. This is all I do. So we have a disadvantage in that we're mostly, as artists or photographers, commercial photographers, educators, whatever it is, we mostly we'd be considered dabbling or part-time in the stuff. So the more you work in it, the better you get, and the better you get, the more you're going to find the techniques are refined and people get good. I always tell people I'd run out of business if I was working the 19th century for all my artifacts. Yeah, you'd get good at it though. You'd get good at it. The book mentioned using vignettes. Yes, that's exactly what they did. Center image and then a big space around it. They could mat it. Even in small plates, direct positives, they could do all that stuff. Yep. That's it. That's a good point. It's always interesting to talk about the different aesthetics from the 19th century to the 21st, what we're doing today, and the desires of the viewer. So back then, it was almost like the F-64 club. Like, I want everything tack sharp, foreground to background. They're almost 3-dimensional. They worked a lot smaller. I mean, Watkins, 1822 and big giant plates and that stuff. That was kind of rare. Most photographers worked very small because it was expensive. And if you did portraits, most people couldn't afford huge portraits anyway. So they'd use these really tight stop-down lenses, a lot of light, everything sharp, almost 3-dimensional, clean, right? And today we're working with lenses that are too small for the plates, depth of field, that, really soft, edge to edge. We'll fill the plate up with a subject. I mean, we just push it way out there. They wouldn't accept any 99% of the stuff posted online today. 19th century photographers would reject immediately. I mean, there's probably only 1 or 2 of my plates that they'd accept, right? And there was even, subject matter, composition. Look at the portraits, study the portraits of the 19th century. There was a methodology they had which made a good portrait. I mean, what they put in, how they position the people. Rarely do you see this kind of direct, straight-on face. The aesthetics are completely different. The technical prowess completely different. The desires completely different. I mean, there's a lot of things that have changed to compare our plates with 19th century plates. It's apples and oranges, or oranges and elephants, something like that, because completely different. Now, if you were to take Civil War reenactors and people working in that time period, historically correct, they'd want to do those things, right? That's why you never seen a American Civil War reenactor with an 11x14 camera out there, right? They didn't exist. They just weren't doing that. They were doing quarter plate, half plate, maybe full plate, whole plate, out there, but mostly quarter plate and half plate, and mostly quarter plate and 6 plate, to be honest with you. So the technical approach was different. The aesthetic approach was different. The end product was different, and the intention or the context of making the photographs were very different. So you had a lot going on. And probably 170 years from now, I don't think we'll last that long, but if we do, 170 years from now, they'll be comparing their image making techniques with ours. And if they revive some process, they'll be using it differently than we are. So with the exception of that one group, the reenactors or the historical kind of folks, most people do not use this to be historically correct. They use it in memory or connection to the past or something like this, or content-wise. If they live in the southern United States, they might use some idea behind that, but they don't. We don't, for the most part. We're not trying to replicate the 19th century, but in some cases, it might be a good practice to try that, just technically, to see where you're at, because I've found that the minute I try to make a perfectly clean plate, I don't. But then when I'm working hard and I'm just getting on my routine, I'll have 1 or 2 of them come out without even thinking about it. It's just practice. That's all it is. Getting your technique down, keeping your chemistry strong, understanding your light and your optics and your technique, and you'll get it down. So that was all I had today. And I hope it was interesting. Anybody have anything they want to chime in about or talk about? If not, I'll try to get an advertisement out a little earlier next week. But I think people know that I'm here, and people, this is summer's winding down here in America, so maybe people are out and about. But we had 20 people in here, so there's a few people watching. And regardless, I would do that. I'd talk to myself on these things sometimes, because I know I get emails long after this and say, I just watched your video and you were talking about, and it's like, wow, my God. Now, that was like 6 months ago. Okay. Do we know how they hauled large glass plates and horse-drawn wagons on unpaved roads? Do we know? we do know that they did that, Jay, and obviously they had they had they had some techniques to keep the glass from breaking. I would imagine, to be honest with you, I would imagine they were slotted boxes. I mean, and they broke a lot of glass. I know that they broke a lot of glass, and again, they got good at this stuff, right? I wonder how those Egyptians built the pyramids. I can't even imagine, right? But they did it somehow. So, and I don't know if we even know now. So, but yeah, that's a good question, Jay. I think they got really good at it and was profoundly efficient. So, thanks everybody. Stay safe, and remember, I'm going to try to be here every Saturday. So I'll try to get the word out next time a little bit earlier. And it was nice having Silo and John in live. Prevents me from talking to myself. Take care, guys. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your weekend. Be safe. Ciao.